when a broken man and two stray dogs become the only shield for a life that's just begun. Who will thaw first, the child or the heart guarding her? What if, in the darkest hour of a snowstorm, a German shepherd appeared at your door, carrying a newborn, shivering and silent, while the world outside vanished in white? Would you answer? Would you take them in, knowing you might risk everything? This is not just a story about survival. It's about second chances, quiet courage, and the strange, miraculous ways that love returns to those who have given up hope. Stay with me, because sometimes the most ordinary night brings the miracle we need most. Night in Vermont falls like a heavy hand, thick with cold and the hush of old woods holding their breath. It is the kind of winter only those who have lived long enough come to understand. Not just snow, but a weight, a silence, the world tucked in beneath its own sorrow. In the small town of Maple Trace, tucked deep against the forest's edge, a single porch light fights the storm. Inside the cabin, Deputy Owen Grady sits alone at a pine table, hands curled around a mug that's long gone cold. The lamp above flickers, painting a trembling gold on the faded wallpaper and the boots by the door. He is a man shaped by years outdoors, broad-shouldered, rough around the edges, streaks of gray already threading his brown hair. The fire in the old cast-iron stove breathes soft warmth, but it does little for the chill rooted in his chest. His eyes, blue and steady, rest on the photograph propped by the window. A girl, smiling, her face turned half away, as if caught between staying and leaving. A clock ticks, the kettle sighs. Beyond the glass, snow comes sideways, thick as secrets, battering the porch in ceaseless waves. The town's lights have vanished, swallowed by the storm, and every tree stands motionless, their branches aching beneath the frost. Here time moves slow, and memory lingers. By Owen's feet, Shep lies curled in a patch of shadow, his breathing deep and even. He's an old German shepherd now, fur gone dense and dark as storm clouds, but with one ear folding, a permanent sign from winters past. His paws twitch now and then with dreams Owen can't enter. Every so often, Shep's eyes flicker open, wise, patient, unwavering, then close again, as if to reassure himself that this quiet is real. The hours bleed into one another. Owen stands, pours out the cold tea, sets the kettle on again. He moves with a certain carefulness, a man used to empty space and silent nights, each gesture deliberate, unhurried. He sits back down, lets the silence fill his lungs, and studies the snow on the windowsill, watching it thicken, watching the world fade into white. In these moments, he thinks of his daughter, the way she used to dance in the kitchen, bare feet on old linoleum, her laughter rising like steam in the cold air. That was another life. These days, phone calls are short, and the distance longer than any road he's ever patrolled. The wind rattles the door, but it is only the wind, or so he believes. Then, so soft he almost misses it, a knock, a hesitation, nothing urgent, as though someone were unsure whether to ask for shelter or simply wait out the night. Owen's spine stiffens. He glances at Shep, who is already up, head low, tail still, body pointed toward the door. The clock marks 1:15 midnight. He crosses the living room. His boots make no sound on the worn floorboards. Owen hesitates, listening. Not a voice, not a cry. Only the persistent hush of snow against wood. He unlatches the bolt, fingers cold despite the fire, and pulls the door open. For a moment, nothing but the storm. Then shapes. Shep steps forward, and the porch light falls on two dogs. The shepherd, Shep, and a smaller, unfamiliar dog, fur clumped with ice, eyes reflecting the yellow glow. Between them, half-shadowed, is a wicker basket wrapped in a heavy woolen coat. The dogs do not move. They wait, alert but without fear, sentinels carved out of wind and frost. Owen's heart gives a dull, surprised thud. He stoops, snow soaking through his knees, and looks closer. The basket shifts. There, in the folds of a stranger's coat, is a newborn. A face flushed crimson from cold, tiny fists opening and closing in the chill, breath visible in sharp, shallow puffs. The baby's eyes are closed, mouth puckered, a whimper barely escaping between trembling lips. Owen gathers the basket, his hands steady despite the rush of worry in his chest. The smaller dog shivers but does not back away. Shep stands close, pressing his body to Owen's leg, as if to anchor them all against the storm. Owen stands, turning his shoulder to shield the child, and ushers the dogs inside. Inside, the warmth is thick, but not enough. He sets the basket by the stove, pulling off the damp coat, cradling the infant in arms awkward with memory. His hands, scarred from winters and lost cases, fumble with buttons, with blankets. The child's skin is cool, too cool. Owen moves with careful urgency, old towels warmed by the fire, a pot of water set to heat, a bottle rinsed and filled with formula that's been sitting, unused, at the back of the pantry. All the while, Shep and the stray sit silent, watching, their bodies tense as if every muscle waits for his next move. No words. Only the ticking clock, the stove's hum, the child's quiet, gasping breaths. Owen works by habit. First responder, father, lost man trying to remember how to hope. He wraps the baby tight, kneels on the rug, lets his own warmth seep into that fragile form. For a moment, his chin rests on the child's soft head, and he closes his eyes. Just the three of them, a man, two dogs, and a newborn on a winter's night. Outside, the storm rages. Inside, something shifts, as gentle as breath on glass. Owen looks at the basket, the dogs, the baby in his arms. There is no explanation, no logic that matters. There is only the night, and the warmth they share, and the faint, flickering hope that what is lost can sometimes find its way home, if only for a while. The fire snaps. Shep curls close to the child. Owen sits in the hush, watching the snow climb higher on the glass, letting the room fill with silence, and with it, something soft. A promise, perhaps, that even in the coldest hour, the world might offer up a miracle, quiet and trembling, right at your door. The storm tightened its grip through the hours before dawn. The world outside vanished behind a curtain of wind and white, but within Owen's cabin, time seemed to slow and settle, the kind of hush that follows crisis, when the mind stops scrambling and simply listens. He sat cross-legged on the threadbare rug, a heavy blanket wrapped around the basket and its precious, barely breathing cargo. The baby's face, now less angry red, more pale rose, poked out from layers of flannel and wool, eyelids fluttering, mouth pursed in tiny, searching motions. The wood stove let off soft cracks and sighs, the only conversation in the room. Owen's hands trembled, more from memory than cold. He poured warm water into an old bottle, tested it against his wrist, then against his cheek. He remembered the years when this act had been ritual, a bottle held in the quiet of early morning, his daughter's small hands clutching at his thumb. Now, the same motion, but heavier, older. Time had changed his grip. Yet here, in the hush and flicker of firelight, there was something familiar in the helplessness, the resolve. He let the baby suck at the bottle, coaxing the flow, one patient drop at a time. Shep and the stray, thin, brown-eyed, with one paw raw and pink from the ice, watched from a safe distance. Shep shifted first, his big frame lowering gently beside Owen, muzzle resting on the edge of the blanket. He did not nudge, did not whine. He only watched, his eyes searching Owen's face, then the baby's, as if weighing the odds of all this fragile life against the night outside. The stray circled, uneasy, then sat pressed against the door, ears cocked, eyes darting from the basket to the window, then back to the baby. Shep gave a low, almost imperceptible huff. It was not a sound of fear or impatience, but a question, unspoken, old as time. What now? Owen worked in silence. He wiped the child's cheeks with a corner of his shirt, pressed his palm against a tiny chest, counting breaths. Each sound, a faint hiccup, a mewling whimper, the soft gurgle of the bottle, felt like a promise the world was still working as it should. He found a clean hand towel and folded it into a pillow, tucking it beneath the child's head. His movements were awkward, clumsy with years of neglect, but careful. He whispered no comfort, offered no explanations, only the acts themselves, warmth, food, presence. The dogs seemed to understand. In the dim light, Shep's eyes shone with a patient gravity. His tail tapped the floor once, then stilled. The stray never looked away from the baby, a line drawn between fear and hope. In their silence there was no accusation, only vigilance. Owen moved to the small window and peered out. The world had disappeared. Even the pine trees, usually bold against the snow, were only faint silhouettes. He turned back, pulled a kettle off the stove, poured tea into his mug, then let it sit untouched. The room smelled of wet fur, wool, wood smoke, and the faint, clean tang of snow melting from boots and basket. He knelt again beside the child, touching her wrist, then her forehead, tracing the heat, the pulse. He wondered at the smallness of this life, at the trust that had been thrust into his hands, unasked and unexplained. For a long while he simply watched, her chest rising, falling, the flutter of eyelids, a sigh. It was not joy he felt, not hope, not yet, only a kind of trembling responsibility, a pulse in his chest, ancient and reluctant. Shep nosed closer, tongue flicking once across the baby's brow. The stray moved, too, hesitant, then curled up at last against the leg of Owen's chair, surrendering to the shelter and the warmth. Owen took stock, one man, two dogs, and a life that needed more than what he knew how to give. He thought of calling for help, but the phone line was dead, somewhere in the blizzard, wires down, or maybe just the world asking him to wait, to try. He named the child in his thoughts, Hope. Not because he believed in miracles, but because it was the only word he had left that didn't feel worn thin by disappointment. There were no answers that night, only a chorus of breath and heartbeat, and the slow burn of the fire. Owen drifted between wakefulness and memory, each time returning to the present with a jolt, the baby shifting, a log settling in the stove, the dogs shifting closer. He added another log to the fire, then lay back against the leg of the couch, feeling the ache in his spine, the stubborn thump of his heart. At some point, the storm eased its howling. The clock moved toward 4. Owen, not fully asleep, not truly awake, let his eyes rest on Shep's steady gaze, on the stray's patient waiting, on the slow rise and fall of hope's breath. He did not pray, but he did not curse the night either. There was only the simple act of keeping one small life warm and letting the silence do the rest. When dawn threatened beyond the window, all three, man, dogs, child, remained close by the fire, a fragile circle carved from snow and chance. Outside, the world was still, and inside, the first warmth of morning began to seep into Owen's bones. No explanations, no certainty. Only this, a newborn, a flicker of trust, and the slow, almost imperceptible turning of a heart, brittle but burning, towards something like gentleness at the end of a long, cold night. Night gave way to a slow, blue dawn that barely reached past the frost on the cabin windows. The storm, relentless for hours, softened to a hush, leaving behind a world silenced and reshaped by snow. Owen stirred, joints stiff from sleeping half upright against the couch, the faint ache in his back a familiar companion. The baby lay curled in blankets close by the stove, a trace of pink warming her cheeks, one tiny fist tangled in the worn flannel. The stray, belly rising and falling in uneasy dreams, slept wedged beside the kitchen door. Shep was there too, his nose touching the child's shoulder, his chest expanding in slow, even breaths. Owen stood, careful not to wake the others, and crossed to the window. The glass was clouded with frost. His own breath made a little patch of warmth in the whiteness. He traced the edge of the window frame with a thumb, feeling the cold seep into his bones. The world outside was still unbroken, just snow, unmarked and pure, softening the edges of every fence and fallen branch. The road into town, the path through the trees, all erased by night. He boiled water, set another mug of tea on the table. The small rituals steadied him. He thought of his daughter as a child, the way she used to wake too early and crawl into the kitchen, curling in his lap while he drank coffee and read the morning reports. He thought of the long, slow years that followed, distance stretching, words thinning out, calls growing rare. Somewhere in the ache of those memories, something softer lingered, a wish, maybe, or a question. What was left of himself, now that nobody needed him to be strong? Shep woke at the sound of the kettle, his head rising, eyes bright but gentle. Owen crouched beside him, fingers hesitating, then brushing lightly through the old shepherd's fur. The dog pressed his head into Owen's palm, a silent gesture that asked for nothing, offered everything. In that moment, the years between them, rescues, long nights, the silent drives after calls that ended badly, felt both close and impossibly distant. A memory surfaced, brittle as dried leaves, another winter, years before. Shep as a younger dog, shivering and thin, found by the roadside after being left behind by someone who didn't wait, who couldn't care. Owen had coaxed him home with a blanket and a scrap of ham, had knelt in this very room, speaking softly into the dog's fear, promising nothing but warmth and a chance. It had taken weeks for trust to grow, for the trembling to quiet. Yet here they were, still together, battered and quieter, the sharpness of pain worn smooth by time. He stroked Shep's head, feeling the rise of an old scar beneath the fur. The story of a fence jumped, a chase through deep snow, the snap of something sharp. The dog blinked, slow and solemn, then pressed in closer, tail thumping once, then still. Owen closed his eyes for a breath. The act of touch, wordless and plain, carried its own confession. It said, "I remember you. I remember who I was when you needed me." The baby stirred, a sound barely more than a sigh. Owen leaned over, straightened the blanket, tucked her hand back inside the warmth. She did not wake, but her brow smoothed, her breathing settled. The stray, sensing the shift, lifted his head, ears pricked. For a long time the four of them listened together. The tick of the clock, the murmur of the fire, the faint wind pressing against the roof. Light crept through the cracks in the curtains, blue and fragile. Owen poured his tea and sat on the floor beside Shep, the mug cradled in both hands. His thoughts drifted, unrushed, unwatched. Sometimes he saw himself as others might, a man out of place, alone by choice, old before his time. He wondered if he had grown hard, or merely hollowed out, shaped by too many nights when the phone rang too late, when the right words could not be found. Maybe that was why he felt the weight of the child in the basket so keenly. Not just her need, but the reminder of all he had lost, all he had not managed to save. Shep nuzzled his knee, steady as ever. The dog's faith was undented by years, by mistakes, by grief. There was comfort in that, a kind of forgiveness that needed no voice. As the morning grew, Owen rose, stretched his back, and stoked the fire. He took out his phone, checked for a signal, nothing. He made a mental note to try again later, maybe walk toward the edge of the property if the weather cleared. He brewed oatmeal, fed the dogs, boiled water for a new bottle. Each task was small, unremarkable, but together they made a rhythm, a way of holding fear at bay, a way of stitching 1 hour to the next. At noon, a shaft of sunlight slipped through the window, lighting up dust motes in the air. Owen sat on the floor again, Shep's head in his lap, the baby close by. He didn't think of the future, or of answers. For the first time in a long time, he let himself just be, just breathe, just notice the warmth, the soft weight of trust, the gentle steadiness that grows between old wounds and the hope of something gentle at the end of pain. He closed his eyes, and for a few heartbeats, it felt as if the cabin itself was holding its breath. The world outside erased, and everything that mattered resting in the hush of this winter morning. Morning in Maple Trace is seldom bright in the heart of winter. Even after the storm had spent itself, the sun rose only as a pale coin behind drifting veils of cloud. Owen noticed it first, as a gentle glow pressing against the frost-rimmed glass, then as a softening of the long blue shadows that clung to the cabin's walls. The baby had slept, restless, but safe. Shep and the stray took turns lying close by, sharing their heat with her, their bodies curled in the patient half-sleep of creatures who know the world is not always kind. Owen watched the child's breathing before he moved, as if making certain the night hadn't quietly taken something back. He pulled on his boots, shrugged into his heavy coat, and paused by the door. The stray, wary but loyal, rose and paced anxiously, as if sensing a new uncertainty in the morning air. Stepping out, Owen was struck by the silence. Snow muffled every sound, absorbing even the groan of the pines, making the world feel far away, removed from everything but the raw presence of cold and light. He breathed in, the air sharp against his teeth, the smell of winter deep and clean. The sky above was a pale, uncertain blue. The town below, nearly invisible through the trees, might as well have belonged to another age. He looked down the steps. That's when he saw them. Tracks, too wide and deep for an animal, pressed fresh into the powder and leading from the edge of the woods to a point just beyond the porch. They crisscrossed each other, as if someone had stood and waited, shifting their weight, uncertain whether to approach or withdraw. The pattern was unmistakable. Boots, the kind issued by the state, treaded for rough ground. Yet the tracks did not continue up to the door. They stopped short, then turned away, vanishing back into the timber, lost quickly in the drifts and the sloping rise of the hill. Owen crouched, gloved fingers brushing the impression in the snow. The tracks were newer than the storm, newer than even the first light. Someone had come close, close enough to see the cabin, maybe close enough to watch, but not close enough to risk the final step. A prickle moved down his spine. He stood, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Only the silent architecture of snow and pine. The distant suggestion of movement that could have been wind or memory. The world looked gentle in this pale light, but it was an old gentleness, wary and unsentimental. Inside, the stray whined softly at the door, tail stiff. Shep pressed his nose against the glass, watching Owen with calm, unwavering eyes. Owen knocked the snow from his boots and entered again, the change in temperature immediate, welcome. The baby had not woken. She lay curled, arms loose above her head, a faint frown flickering across her brow. Owen moved with deliberate quiet, not wanting to startle the dogs or disturb the child. He checked the windows, locks in place, curtains drawn, then set about his morning tasks, each one feeling more purposeful, more necessary than the day before. He boiled water, chopped kindling, swept stray flakes from the threshold. As he did, the stray paced between the kitchen and the door, finally settling in a tense crouch by the basket. Shep sat beside her, a silent sentry, one ear pricked, the other folded. Owen knelt and scratched behind Shep's good ear, murmuring nothing, just presence and reassurance. He let the moments stretch, filling the room with the quiet language of trust. It was then, as he gathered up the blankets to warm them by the stove, that he found it. A slip of paper, crumpled, nearly missed among the folds of the coat that had been wrapped around the child. The handwriting was hurried. The ink faded, but still legible. Please keep this child safe. No names. No plea for help beyond the simple, naked request for safety. Owen held the note between his thumb and forefinger, letting its weight settle in his mind. He thought about what kind of person would trust a stranger with something so fragile, so easily lost. He thought about the boots in the snow, the way they had lingered, then retreated. A fresh caution settled over him. Not fear exactly, but a tightening of awareness, a sharpening of edges. He moved quietly, checking the battery in his old radio, glancing now and then at the window where the snow pressed up against the glass. The outside world, for all its stillness, felt suddenly closer, peering in with uncertain intent. But the day itself went on, slow as syrup in winter. Owen kept the fire steady, changed the baby, made oatmeal, and shared the scraps with the dogs. He spoke little, only a word or two here and there, his voice quieter than before. He found comfort in the routines, the measured gestures, the way Shep's nose nuzzled his palm, the warmth of the baby's breath against his wrist. Through the window, sunlight played on the snow, casting long, bright shadows. The tracks outside would soon be erased, lost to the drift and the next fall of flurries. Owen let that thought settle, the sense that what had come close might come again, or might simply vanish, like so many questions in the hush of winter. He watched the baby sleep, her chest rising and falling in the slow, even rhythm of those who trust the world without knowing it. The dogs flanked her, guardians forged by need and chance, and Owen, in the center of this small, makeshift family, let the strange peace of mourning rest in his heart. A peace shot through with the faint, unshakable awareness that even in the quietest places, the world still leaves its mark. Afternoon drifted in quietly, the kind of cold that sinks through old wood and settles into the bones. Owen moved slowly through the day, guided more by the weight of memory than by the rhythm of the clock. Outside, the snow no longer fell, but its hush lingered over everything, a stillness that felt almost sacred, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Inside the cabin, the hours stretched long and soft. The baby slept, waking only to fuss or feed, her small hands now pink and warm. The stray dog, though less tense than before, remained near the basket, keeping a careful watch, sometimes dozing, sometimes sitting upright, ears tuned to distant sounds. Shep never left Owen's side for long, but made quiet rounds between the hearth and the crib, a sentinel without command, guided only by an instinct that had outlasted the badge. Owen spent most of the day by the window, watching the sky change, the woods bristle with shifting light. He moved from task to task in silence, washing a few dishes, mending a tear in his glove, straightening the pile of firewood by the door. Yet his mind was far from the present, wandering instead through old corridors, cases half solved, names he could not forget, the unending ache of those he could not help. It was the kind of day that brings old wounds to the surface. He saw himself as he'd been, leaner, younger, his eyes burning with the certainty that justice was simply a matter of endurance and luck. He remembered his first missing child case, the endless nights searching, the morning the call came in to stand down. No answers. Just the memory of a small red boot, found in the mud beside a river, and the silence that followed. There were other cases, too, stacked in his mind like faded photographs. Names, faces, the questions that always came too late. Shep nudged his knee, breaking the spell. Owen looked down, then reached out, his fingers finding the old dog's head, tracing the scar that ran above the left eye. For a moment, the room was filled with the warmth of connection, the recognition between two beings shaped by loss and endurance. No words passed between them. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said in 100 nights like this. Hope, a name he hadn't spoken aloud, but one that clung to the baby nonetheless, let out a sigh in her sleep, the tiniest of sounds. The stray pricked her ears, then relaxed again, curling her body protectively around the basket. Owen watched them, something shifting inside him, slow as sap rising in a tree at winter's end. He wondered if love ever really left, or if it only slept, waiting for the right voice, the right small hand to stir it awake. As the day faded, the phone on the counter lit up, glowing weakly, the signal bar flickering into life for the first time in hours. Owen's heart stuttered, then steadied. He crossed the room, answered with a low, quiet, "Grady here." The voice on the other end belonged to Marlene, the dispatcher, her tone businesslike but tinged with concern. "We got a call, Owen. A woman's gone missing from the next county over. Young, late 20s, brown hair. Last seen heading north in a blue sedan. She's got a record. Nothing serious. Just a couple of shoplifting charges and a restraining order. Something about an abusive ex. But this time, her car was found abandoned on the edge of Maple Trace. There was a car seat in the back." Owen listened, the old part of his mind already piecing together questions, possibilities, patterns. Marlene continued, "You hear or see anything strange up your way, you let us know. And Owen, just be careful. Weather's kept everyone inside, but something doesn't feel right." He thanked her, then let the phone rest in his palm, its weight pulling him back to the now. He glanced at the basket, the baby's steady breathing, the dog's unwavering vigil. His thoughts tangled between duty and doubt. Was the child in his care part of the story Marlene had just described, or a whole different one, as lonely as the tracks in the morning snow? Owen did not move for a long time. The light faded from the window, replaced by the first hints of evening blue. He tended to the stove, careful with every motion, refilling the kettle, laying a new log across the embers. The warmth crept out slowly, pushing back the cold, but not the ache that had settled in his chest. Later, he sat at the table, pouring 2 bowls of oatmeal, one for himself, one split between Shep and the stray. He ate quietly, eyes on the fire, the memory of red boots and rivers, of cases closed without comfort, flickering through his mind. He did not let the grief undo him. Instead, he let it settle, gentle as dust, woven into the shape of the present moment. A cabin, a child, 2 dogs, and the faint, stubborn possibility that the past, no matter how broken, did not have to dictate the shape of tomorrow. Outside, a fresh wind stirred the trees. The old house creaked, settling into its own memories, holding warmth against the night. Owen looked at the child, then at Shep, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the heaviness inside him begin, ever so slightly, to ease. Evening settled with the gentleness of falling ash, laying shadows across the cabin's rough-hewn walls. Owen stood at the window, the old phone cool in his palm, Marlene's words lingering in the hush. A missing woman, an abandoned car, a baby seat. He watched as dusk deepened the world beyond the glass, woods turning from blue to gray, then black, their forms blurring with the oncoming night. The storm had left a brittle crust on the snow, shimmering faintly beneath the moon's hesitant rise. Inside, the quiet was almost absolute. Hope slept, cheek pressed into the hollow of her blanket nest, her breath audible only in the intervals between the ticking clock and the shift of logs in the fire. The stray, after hours on silent guard, had dozed at last, paws twitching as if still running in dreams. Shep lay at the foot of Owen's chair, his chin resting across his forepaws, watching the firelight flicker, eyes half-lidded in the kind of contentment that holds sorrow close but refuses to yield. Owen remained at the window a long time, wrestling with thoughts that came and went like distant headlights on a back road, always moving, never quite arriving. The memory of his own daughter, now almost grown, flickered in and out of reach. The ache was quieter tonight, as if softened by the presence of these fragile lives in his care. Yet the ache remained, a reminder of all the moments he'd failed to grasp, all the things he couldn't return. He thought, too, about his oath, the badge tucked away in a drawer, the promise to protect, even when the lines blurred and the world stopped making sense. The right thing was often the hardest to name, let alone to do. What did it mean to be a good man, to choose kindness when fear pressed close? He turned, finally, away from the window. The kettle on the stove let out a low sigh. He poured hot water over a tea bag, letting the steam curl up around his face, the scent of chamomile soothing in the hollow of the room. He moved to the table, setting the mug beside a folded map and a notebook where he'd begun scribbling details, names, times, fragments of possibilities. Nothing quite formed a picture, but the act of writing steadied his hands, anchored him to the here and now. Hope whimpered in her sleep, a breath caught between worlds. Owen set aside his notes, crossed the floor, and knelt by her basket. He laid a gentle hand across her back, feeling the subtle rise and fall, the stutter in her tiny heartbeat. The stray lifted her head, eyes glinting, and then, satisfied, settled again, her tail thumping faintly against the boards. Shep scooted closer, his nose brushing Owen's elbow, a warm reassurance in the dim. Owen stayed there for a long moment, breathing with the child, matching her rhythm. letting her need anchor him. In the hush, the house seemed to grow smaller, cozier. The world outside, with all its questions and cold, faded into something distant, nearly irrelevant. He realized he was waiting, not for an answer, but for permission to trust what was right in front of him. The decision was not sudden. It settled in like warmth from the fire, slow and certain, until he could not remember when it began. He would not call the social services tonight. He would not hand the baby over to the system just because it was the easiest way to clear his conscience. Instead, he would wait. He would watch. He would hold vigil over this small, uncertain life. Just a while longer, until the story became clearer or the need passed. It was not an act of rebellion, nor one of blind hope. It was the quiet courage of a man who had lost much and learned that sometimes the best a person can do is simply to stay, present, patient, a witness to whatever comes. Owen sat by the fire, mug warming his hands. The dogs settled close, their bodies forming a ring of silent protection around the baby. He looked at Shep, met those steady, intelligent eyes, and felt a tide of gratitude rise in his chest. Here in this circle, he was less alone than he had been in years. Outside, the wind changed. A branch scraped the roof, but the night held. Hope slept on, and for the first time Owen felt her trust. Not in words, but in the way she curled deeper into her blankets, in the way she sighed and settled when his hand rested near. It was enough. He did not need to understand everything. He did not need to plan every next step. For now, it was enough to keep the fire burning, to keep the child warm, to let the quiet be a kind of answer. And in that quiet, Owen felt something inside him begin to mend, slow as a candle flame that stubbornly refuses to die, casting its faint glow through the longest night. Night arrived again on muffled feet. In the forest around Owen's cabin, the wind pressed through the boughs with the sound of an old song, soft, breathless, almost mournful. Shadows gathered in the corners of the room, and the fire in the stove shrank to a deep amber pulse. Owen sat at the table, a pencil turning slow circles in his hand, above a half-finished page of notes. He had written nothing for a long time, the lines breaking off mid-thought, lost in the hush. Hope slept on, cheeks flushed with the simple exhaustion of babies, mouth parted, one hand curled against her chest. The stray, a silent brown sentinel, lay between the crib and the door, her body tense beneath her thin fur. Only Shep seemed undisturbed, his body stretched in a crescent at Owen's feet, ears twitching in some private dream. The hush of evening was not the same as peace. Something hovered at the edges, a sense of being watched, a current beneath the calm. Owen listened, his breath in rhythm with the fire's pulse, his thoughts wandering in quiet loops. It was Shep who changed first. The dog's body stiffened, his tail dropping. He rose, slow and purposeful, padding toward the door with head lowered. The stray roused in tandem, both animals standing guard, their posture unhurried but alert. Owen set the pencil down, moving quietly, his boots soft on the boards. He went to the window, careful not to disturb the curtain, peering out into the night. Snow reflected what little moonlight there was, turning the yard into a pale, indistinct tableau. Pine branches shivered in the wind. The rest was shadow. Nothing moved, yet nothing felt empty. The dog's attention sharpened. Shep growled, low and quiet, a sound that seemed to deepen the silence instead of breaking it. The stray circled once, planting herself firmly in front of the basket, her eyes on the door. Owen waited, hand on the latch but not turning it, listening harder. There was no sudden threat, no scream, no flash of violence, only a disturbance in the air, as if the world outside held its breath. He moved away from the window and sat again near the crib, his body a quiet bulwark beside the baby. The fire hissed and popped, small echoes in the hush. In the room, nothing changed, but the tension was real, a thin thread stretching from man to animal to child, vibrating beneath the skin. He thought of past winters, when he'd been called to homes after midnight, lights blazing, doors thrown open, the aftermath of something gone wrong. Those nights had always ended in noise, radio static, rushed voices, questions no one wanted to answer. This night was different. The danger, if it was danger, was not out loud. It came in the form of a shadow seen from the corner of the eye, the wind's shape as it turned against the house. Time dragged. Owen did not speak. He kept his hands open, palms down on his knees, every muscle listening. The stray's breathing was rapid. Her body pressed close to Hope's basket. Shep did not move from the door, not even when Owen called softly under his breath. The old dog's devotion was wordless, a faith in protection, in being present. Outside, the wind rose, then fell. In a brief lull, Owen heard the crunch of snow, faint and careful. A presence, not quite seen, traced the line of the porch before melting away again. He did not go after it. Sometimes he'd learned the bravest thing was to wait, to watch, to let the world bring its mysteries and not demand an answer. The fire flickered, painting the walls with restless gold. Owen's gaze moved from the window to the dogs, to the curve of the baby's cheek. He took in the quiet as a kind of instruction. Sometimes, protection is not a matter of force, but of steadfastness, of being here unyielding, no matter how many nights pass without relief. The house itself seemed to listen, old wood holding its secrets, the warmth inside drawn tight around them all. Owen leaned back, let his eyes close for a moment, his hand resting on the rim of Hope's basket. The room breathed with them, the slow, anxious pant of the stray, Shep's silent vigilance, the fragile, uncertain song of a child's sleep. When dawn finally crept in, pale and slow, nothing had broken the stillness. The threat, if it had been more than fear, had passed on. Shep stretched, yawned, and thumped his tail once against the doorframe. The stray licked Hope's hand, her body loosening as if she too had weathered a long trial. Owen stood and looked out once more. The yard was as it had been, except for a shallow depression in the snow by the trees, a footprint half filled by the wind, already on its way to disappearing. He did not try to chase away the unease that lingered. He simply made coffee, fed the dogs, and sat by the fire as the morning grew. The lesson was old. In the face of what you cannot see or name, you hold close what you have, and let your courage be quiet, strong, and unspoken. Morning revealed itself in layers of blue-gray and pearl, the first light tentative as if unsure of its welcome. Frost jeweled the window's edge, each pattern delicate and fleeting, like a secret almost spoken. Owen awoke before Hope stirred, his neck stiff from dozing in the armchair, boots still on, hand unconsciously resting atop the child's blanket. He listened, heart attuned to the house, the soft click of Shep's claws as the old shepherd paced a circuit from door to window and back, the stray's low, questioning whine from the foot of the crib. Nothing had happened in the night. Nothing, and yet, something was changed. When he moved to the kitchen, he found the back window had shifted, a small edge of cold air curling beneath the sill. The lock, which had sat flush and certain for years, now bore a faint new scratch, metal glinting against wood. A shiver went through Owen, not of cold, but of something older, a memory of intrusion, the sudden understanding that danger was no longer theoretical, but had brushed its fingers along the very walls of this sanctuary. He did not panic. He set the kettle to boil, fed both dogs, then checked every window and door with methodical care. Outside, last night's tracks had vanished beneath a new dusting of snow, but the house itself seemed unsettled, as if every board and nail remembered the weight of a stranger's gaze. Owen's eyes fell on Hope, asleep but uneasy. Her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, face pinched in a dream. The stray did not leave her side, refusing even a treat, as if duty outweighed hunger. Shep waited at the threshold, body angled as if expecting a call to action. There was no need for words. The decision took shape quietly. Something would have to change. The house, for all its history, could no longer be the safe harbor it had been. Owen knelt before Shep, meeting the dog's eyes. No command was given, but Shep rose, tail low, ready. He gathered what little they needed, a spare blanket, formula and bottles, diapers, a battered first aid kit. In the pocket of his coat, he slipped the note he'd found. "Please keep this child safe," and the slip of paper from dispatch about the missing woman. He moved through the motions in silence, pausing at times to press a hand to the back of Hope's head, or to rest his palm against the warm, steady thump of Shep's ribs. He bundled Hope against his chest, wrapped in layers of wool, her breath misting the air between them. The stray circled, anxious, before settling at Owen's heel. Shep moved to the door, nudging it once with his nose, eyes searching for Owen's. They stepped outside. The cold was bracing, but no longer cruel. The trees, dense and watchful, flanked their route as Owen turned his back on the cabin, his home, his refuge. Now just another place in the world that could not keep all shadows at bay. His boots broke a new path through the drifts, Shep leading, the stray flanking the rear, every few paces looking back to be sure Hope was still there, still safe. Their destination was clear in Owen's mind, the old church on the hill, a place of shelter and quiet. He remembered it from years past, a haven for those with nowhere else to turn, a white steeple poking through pines, windows colored by sunlight, pews that creaked with the weight of stories. The journey was slow. Each step was measured, as much for caution as for the simple reality of carrying a child and the weight of fear. Shep stopped at every bend, nose to the wind, body tense but unafraid. Owen trusted the dog's judgment more than his own. In the spaces between the crunch of snow and the rasp of his own breath, he heard nothing but the world's hush. No engines, no voices, only the slow pulse of winter. Halfway up the hill, Hope woke, not with a cry but a fretful, searching sound. Owen paused, unzipped his coat just enough to tuck her closer, the heat of her cheek seeping through the wool to his heart. He hummed, not a lullaby, just a thread of sound to anchor her to this world. When they reached the church, Owen knocked once, then waited. No one answered. He tried the door. It opened, as it always had, the hinges creaking, the air within cold but dry. The space was empty except for the memories of all those who had sat here in need, in prayer, in exhaustion. Owen moved to the farthest pew, settled Hope into his lap, and let the dogs settle. Shep by the aisle, the stray pressed tight to his side. He did not speak. There was nothing to say. He only listened, to Hope's breath, to the dog's soft sighs, to the groan of wind against old glass. The world beyond these walls might remain uncertain, but here in this moment, in the stillness earned by courage and 1,000 small, unspoken acts of care, there was safety, however fleeting. Sometimes protection is not loud. It is a quiet persistence, a refusal to yield, an old dog waiting at the door, a man walking through snow at dawn, a stranger's kindness left behind in a note. In the hush of the church, Owen let the weight of decision fade, leaving only the fragile, stubborn warmth of those who choose to stay. The church on the hill greeted dawn the way old buildings do, by holding its breath and letting light fall through wavy glass, collecting in pale pools on worn floorboards. The world outside was hushed, sky washed in faint gold, a promise of warmth somewhere far beyond the trees. Owen did not sleep. He sat on the back pew, coat still wrapped around hope, head bowed not in prayer but in a wordless reflection. The baby, nestled into the crook of his arm, drifted between waking and sleep. Sometimes she reached for his shirt, curling a fist in the fabric. Sometimes she whimpered, and Owen pressed his palm to her chest, feeling the soft, sure thump of her heart, and letting its rhythm steady him. The stray, having found her place, lay curled under the first row of pews, chin on her paws, ears flicking at the sounds of morning. Shep patrolled the length of the aisle, not restless, only watchful, his shadow sliding along the faded rug. It was not long before someone else entered. The old pastor, coat buttoned wrong, hat askew, face creased by sleep and long winters. He did not startle when he saw them. In Maple Trace, surprise was a luxury. He nodded to Owen, moving with the careful dignity of men who know what it is to welcome need. Owen rose, baby in his arms, and met the pastor halfway down the aisle. No words passed between them at first, just the mutual understanding of men who have both kept vigil through too many nights. The pastor laid a hand on Hope's head, murmured a quiet blessing that slipped away into the cold beams of light. He gestured toward the small room off the altar, the one that had, for decades, harbored runaways, widowers, and travelers lost on icy roads. Owen followed, the dogs close behind. Within that room, warmth gathered from a radiator that rattled and groaned, from quilts left by women who had nothing but time and memory to offer. Owen settled Hope on the bed, then sat beside her. Shep lay down at the threshold, paws splayed, eyes never leaving the door. The stray at last closed her eyes, trusting that, for now, her duty was shared. The pastor brewed tea, set the pot between them, and sat in silence. The baby's breathing deepened. Owen looked down at her tiny mouth, at the uncertain thread that had led her here. He felt the familiar rise of questions. What next? Whose child? How long? But let them pass like birds outside a high window. This, he realized, was what it meant to choose trust, to give himself over to a day that might not have answers, only the offer of presence, of hands that hold and do not let go. Hours passed. Outside, the sky grew clearer, blue pressing in at the edges. In town, a phone call was made, and soon enough, a woman with tired eyes and careful hands arrived. Social worker, mother, neighbor, she took Hope in her arms with the ease of one who had carried sorrow and joy in equal measure. She asked Owen his name, took down his story in pencil on a pad. He answered quietly, honestly, leaving out nothing but the ache in his heart. When she offered to take Hope, Owen did not protest. Instead, he pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead, a gesture as much for himself as for her, and laid her in the woman's arms. The stray nosed the woman's sleeve, then, with a last look, settled at Owen's feet. Shep nudged Owen's leg, eyes steady. The morning felt larger than before, full of movement. Doors opening, footsteps echoing, voices gentle and sure. Owen stepped out into the vestibule, letting the chill bite his cheeks, letting his lungs fill with air sharper and cleaner than he remembered. He walked a while with Shep and the stray, circling the churchyard, boots cutting tracks through the drift. The sky was streaked with rose and violet, the first real light since the storm. He did not feel alone. Each print Shep left beside his own was a wordless reassurance, a testament to loyalty that did not question, only remained. Later, as he prepared to return to his cabin, the pastor pressed Owen's hand in parting. "You did the right thing," he said, voice rough as gravel. Owen nodded, unsure what to call the mix of relief and regret that twisted inside him. The stray, limping slightly, followed them back down the hill, pausing at every bend as if making certain the path would remain open behind. By midday, Hope was gone, on her way to a new place, with a promise that her mother had been found and would soon come to her. Owen stood on his porch, Shep beside him, the stray at his feet. For the first time in many years, his heart felt less brittle, less shuttered. In the quiet, he let himself believe that trust, once chosen, did not end. It moved forward, hand to hand, paw to paw, heart to heart. He watched the sky, watched the light, and waited. He did not know what the future would bring, but when the sun broke through, warming the snow, he knew the world had shifted, just enough in the direction of hope. Spring does not announce itself all at once in Vermont. It arrives quietly, step by step, seeping into the bones of the earth, nudging the frost aside with soft rain and the slow, persistent push of green through thawing ground. For weeks, the snow lingered on the north slopes and shaded hollows. But down in Maple Trace, the creek began to run, and robins returned to the brittle branches outside Owen's window. He had not seen Hope since that morning in the church, but word drifted back through the usual town channels, a note in a grocery line, a few sentences on the sheriff's desk, a smile from the pastor when their paths crossed in the square. Hope's mother had been found, battered by circumstance but alive, clutching desperately to the idea of reunion. Papers were signed. A home was found for both of them in a neighboring county, a fresh start threaded with the quiet strength of survival. Owen felt neither triumph nor loss, only a softening, like the world after a thaw. He moved through his days with more intention. There were chores, repairs, things put off too long in winter's grip. Mending the fence at the edge of his lot, sweeping grit from the porch, oiling the hinges of the barn. He wrote a letter to his daughter, slowly, awkwardly, the pen pausing often over blank spaces. He did not say everything. He did not have to. Sometimes the words themselves are less important than the act of sending them out, hoping they find their way. Shep grew slower as the days warmed. He would rise early, stretching beside the door, waiting for Owen to tie his boots before heading out into the weak sun. The stray had not left them. She became a constant presence, sometimes venturing to the edge of the woods, always returning by dusk to curl in the patch of light beside the kitchen stove. She and Shep developed a language of their own, a nose pressed to flank, a tail flick, a look that held more than words ever could. One afternoon, Owen found himself sitting on the steps, the boards warm beneath his palms, the world humming with new life. Shep dozed in a shaft of sun, ears twitching at the chorus of birds overhead. The stray watched the lane, her eyes patient, as if she too understood waiting as a kind of faith. Owen sat with them, letting the minutes stretch and dissolve. He felt no hurry. He watched the last scraps of snow slip into the earth, felt the first stubborn shoots of grass push through the mud. There was a peace to this waiting, a quiet gift that had not been here before. For the first time in years, Owen did not reach for the radio or the phone when the house settled into silence. He listened instead to the living hush, the steady breathing of the dogs, the wind stirring the birch trees, the creek gossiping in its channel. There were still nights when old fears woke him, when memory sharpened and left him raw. But now there was something to meet those memories, a gentleness, a resilience earned not by fighting, but by staying. A letter came in the mail, weeks after Hope and her mother had left. It was short, just a thank you, written in a careful hand, with a pressed violet tucked between the pages. "You held us in our coldest hour," it read, and somehow that was enough. Owen read it 3 times before folding it into the drawer with his daughter's letters. He found himself smiling at nothing, the corners of his mouth softening in the way of men who do not often let the world see their joy. As the sun set that evening, painting the kitchen in gold and honey, Owen wrote one last line in his notebook. Sometimes, to save another, all you have to do is open your door. Sometimes, the smallest act, a cup of warmth, a steady hand, a faithful dog at your side, is enough to bring someone home. He went out onto the porch as darkness gathered, Shep at his side, the stray pressed close to his leg. Across the yard, a single pine tree stood, battered by storms, roots deep in thawed earth, branches reaching for the changing sky. Owen watched the tree for a long time, letting the quiet sink into his bones. It was not perfection he felt. It was something simpler, truer, a sense that what had been broken might not always be mended, but could be carried gently, with patience and with hope. That night, as the world turned silent and whole, Owen found peace in the company he kept. A loyal dog, a quiet stray, a memory of a child safe and held. And as the candle burned low on the kitchen table, its flame small but unwavering, he understood at last. Not all healing is quick or loud. Some comes on slow feet, in wordless moments, in the steadfast presence of those who simply choose to stay. When the snow finally melted, what remained was not perfection, but the quiet strength of kindness, shaped by hardship, carried by those who chose to stay, even when leaving would have been easier. Sometimes, the greatest changes come from the smallest choices, opening your door, offering warmth, trusting a loyal dog's instincts, holding on to hope when you least expect it. Maybe we can't heal all the old wounds, but in learning to care for one another, human or animal, we find new ways to heal ourselves. If this story touched something deep within you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever opened your door to someone or something that changed your life? Or maybe you've found comfort in a quiet companion, four-legged or otherwise, during your own winter. Share your memories, your hopes, or simply let us know you're here. Your story, like theirs, might be the warmth someone else needs tonight. Thank you for watching, and may gentle days find you wherever you are.